This program is powered by realestate.com.au. Know the value of your home today. Track your property now.
Yeah, welcome back to the program. Let's take you to this week's auction markets around the country. They basically obviously fell in a hole as a result of the lockdowns. But what was up for sale generally did pretty well. There were just over 700 auctions around the country, according to REA Group. In Sydney, 163 auctions only, presumably online, and all but 7 of those were sold. In Melbourne, there were 304 auctions, 93% of those sold also. In Brisbane, 35 auctions, but just 77% of them were sold under the hammer. In Adelaide, and with lockdowns there, of course, just 19 auctions. All of them were sold. And finally, the ACT, where there were 44 auctions, and of those, 40 of them were sold. Now, as we've been reporting as of late, property investors are making a comeback after a COVID-related hiatus last year. But just how long will this last? With rental moratoriums back on the cards, is it a case of deja vu for landlords and tenants? Steph Nash reports.
Last year's lockdowns had a profound impact on the property market. Auctions went online, punters held onto their cash, and mortgage holders were faced with a new wave of uncertainty. But it's the investment market where conditions were really turned upside down.
We did see a fall in rents in the capital cities, and it was in part as a result of the moratoriums. What we also saw, though, was that once the moratoriums ended, the first round of moratoriums, that is, rents started to really take off.
Rents in capital cities plummeted after the government introduced rental moratoriums to prevent tenants from being evicted if COVID lockdowns meant they couldn't pay the rent. According to data from SQM, in Sydney, in January 2020, an average 2-bedroom apartment was listed for about $515 a week. In December, it fell to $460 a week, a 10% fall in a year. Houses fared better. In February last year, 3-bedroom houses peaked at around $710 a week. In December, those rents fell to roughly $660, down 7%. In Melbourne, a typical 2-bedroom apartment back in February 2020 was listed for around $435 a week. By the end of the year, you could rent one for $395, a 9% drop in price. Melbourne 3-bedroom houses peaked in March last year at around $545 a week, but dropped to around $505, a fall of 7%.
Well, we're actually starting to see investment in the housing market pick up through most of last year. It was just that we saw a much bigger pickup in demand from first home buyers and upgraders.
The investment market has broadly staged a recovery since January, but with 3 states in lockdown, are yields about to slide again?
I don't think so. We've got a moratorium in place, and I think what we saw during those initial lockdowns last year was that rents were forced down by the fact that international borders were shut at that time, and they've now been shut for 18 months, and those markets have kind of reset themselves. So whilst there might be some challenges, I don't think that we're going to see another big step down in inner city rents.
The New South Wales Tenants Union welcomes the return of moratoriums on evictions, but is concerned about a disturbing pattern, tenants being kicked out because landlords are fed up with sinking rents.
Unfortunately, there was quite a number, and we were getting calls every week from people who were just being told, well, I don't want to negotiate with you and I'm just going to sit tight. I'm not going to sit and negotiate with you. Your rent arrears are going to rack up and you can't force me to the negotiating table.
Vacancies in the rental market climbed last year, rising as much as 15%. It's moderated now to around 6%, at least in Sydney. But could we see higher vacancies and more tenants evicted given the new lockdowns?
People are vulnerable to being evicted or being forced to move for a range of other reasons. And the number one that we are concerned about is the no grounds evictions, where a landlord doesn't have to give any reason or explanation, and certainly there doesn't have to be any suggestion that the tenant has done anything wrong, and they can be asked to leave. And no grounds evictions are used to hide a whole range of things, but particularly in this context, what we saw last year was, unfortunately, a large number of landlords used it to evade the eviction moratorium on rent arrears.
I think investors are very cautious about the moratoriums. No one likes the idea of buying an investment property, finding a tenant, and then the moment you find a tenant, that tenant no longer pays their rent. That's a real nightmare situation for any landlord. So I think that the moratoriums do put off investors. And I think for existing property owners, basically the evidence is showing that existing property owners are actually withdrawing their property from the rental market. They'd rather have no tenant at all and keeping the property clean and vacant versus having a tenant in the property not paying the rent.
For tenants who are stood down or working reduced hours, fearing that they won't be able to pay the rent, the Tenancy Union has some advice.
The landlord's disaster support payment, the $1,500, is something that a landlord or agent has to claim. And so in going to the landlord or agent and saying, look, I'm in some financial problems here because of COVID, you're also asking them to go to government and seek that payment, which covers the landlord for $1,500 of waived rent, which will make a big difference to the ability to have these conversations.
For those looking for yield, on the other hand, lockdowns have seen rents soar in outer urban and regional areas.
Clearly, there is a lot of demand in outer suburban and regional markets, and a lot of those markets do have attractive yields and are also getting some decent price growth on top of that. So it's really a question of what your risk appetite is and what you want longer term. Certainly at the moment, I think rental growth, yields, price growth is much better in the outer capital cities and regional markets than it is in those inner city markets. But, for someone looking to enter the market, you could be getting into those markets at the low point if you do go into an inner city market at the moment.